Good midday to you. This is the midday moment. Well, it's close to midday. I guess if you're in Central Time, it kind of still counts. Midday moment for July the 2nd, 2026, here in Following Him, the Disciple Life. Missed a couple of these, maybe more than that. I'd have to look back. We'll try to do better on that in the future. We do try to do these when we're on schedule, Monday through Friday, and hopefully right at midday, noon in the time zone in which I live is my goal. Anyways, embarrassing overreaction. I'm not sure how these live streams work. I guess you can scroll back and see the initial title. Um, yeah, okay. I'm not going to get into the details of this very recent Supreme Court decision on the birthright citizenship. And if somebody's going to start typing a bunch of stuff about that, we're really not going to get into that as far as the right or wrong, the correct or incorrect about the matter. Um, uh, Full disclosure, and you could look through my other videos on my page and probably guess, I would usually be classified as conservative. I don't always toe the party line though, and I have no problem speaking against my tribe when it comes to stuff like that. And I don't come at it from really ultimately from anything political or partisan. I try to come at it from as a disciple of the Messiah. How should I view different things? And so that's what I try to consider when it comes to political matters and things of that nature. And I do think Scripture teaches a place for the government and things like that nature, but that's for another video. But when it comes to the reaction to this recent Supreme Court decision, in my estimation, with all due respect to people like Matt Walsh, who I do think has been some of the, with all due respect, some of the cringiest and kind of embarrassing reaction to this decision. But even people like Nick Freitas, I think is how you say his name, and I've heard him say a lot of good things, over the past few years, and different people that in many ways and much of the time I would be in agreement. Now, not all the time. In fact, Matt Walsh, I've had a lot of disagreement with him in recent times, which has been kind of surprising to me. I got a little concern. I'm going to take that back. I have at least a medium amount of concern about the direction Matt Walsh has been going recently, but that's maybe for another video. But this reaction to this decision that the Supreme Court has decided that they're going to declare all the parents of these children that would be born with birthright citizenship, they're going to declare them suddenly that they have legal status. No. Now there might be some legal things to work out where maybe they're taking advantage to be able to stay here because their child has birthright citizenship. But that's not, unless I'm misunderstanding something, that's not what's decided. They have essentially just upheld the status quo. In other words, they've decided that this particular change that the president was trying to make, and we're not going to get into everything about that. I am one that I am nuanced with my view when it comes to our current president. I agree with many things he's done. I disagree with some stuff when it comes to our president. So both directions there. But they, the things this particular thing he wanted to do, they're basically saying you can't, not under current law. And this is something from an amendment, which means we're talking about constitutional law, highest law of the land. That's the highest level of law that we have in this country. And so even with that, people need to understand, like those talking about, Congress needs to pass X, Y, and Z. Well, Congress would need to pass an amendment. I mean, when you're talking about a constitutional amendment, you would need to pass an amendment. That's how that works. But this reaction that I'm seeing, Matt Walsh on social media, I noticed an X is just post after post after post, and basically calling. And it was kind of something you had to infer from his words, but it's essentially calling Amy Coney Barrett a liberal. Um, she was one of the deciding votes on striking down Roe v. Wade. That's not something a liberal does. But this constant thing that basically saying that the country's done. That like, and Matt Walsh, I think, is one of the most egregious, at least as far as his, the fact that he does have such a wide audience. So among that group, he's one of the most egregious. Just basically this total meltdown. In fact, somebody did using AI. The picture of the woman that's was screaming at the sky when I believe it was when President Donald Trump was first inaugurated. Back what 10 years ago now, I guess, or almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I guess it would have been 2017. Um, I saw somebody that they used AI to put his face on that woman to have him doing the same, screaming at the sky pose. Because if you look on social media, that's what he and many conservatives are doing. Once again, I would be classified as conservative by many people for my views, and I come at this from the standpoint I try biblical principle. As a Christian, I value the sanctity of life. I do value, what they call traditional marriage. I call it biblical marriage, and I want to see that law does not get in the way of that. The freedom of religion. Now that's a whole thing. You get into a fight with a Christian nationalist, which I am not a Christian nationalist. But I try to approach this from and just this reaction that I'm seeing them have. Guys, the Supreme Court said the status quo is upheld. So really, nothing has changed. They're not saying to the left, you need to, if you want to bring in 60 million illegal aliens, go ahead and do that. In fact, if that tells you anything about where my political thought is, I do call them illegal aliens. That is the proper term. Immigrant kind of softens their legal status in this country, and then that is not the proper, the proper terminology. So, but this reaction, but then I consider when Paul in 1 Corinthians 16:13, he's telling the Corinthians to act like men, and yes, that's a whole discussion there. But that's the Greek word he uses. Like there is a courage, a control, a strength that during the time of Paul when he wrote that and used that word that was associated with men. We've not been given a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And that's what Paul stated in 2 Timothy 1:7. And yet we're going to freak out because the Supreme Court upheld the status quo. According to what the Supreme Court said, unless I'm missing something, that would not give those illegal parents that had the child that receives birthright citizenship, that would not give the child, or excuse me, not give the parents legal status. And the idea that child is going to automatically be, have allegiance to that other country. Well, it's a child. It's a newborn baby. You don't know what it's going to be. And yes, I recognize that goes both ways. But the fact of the matter is, we don't want the Supreme Court to decide based on, well, what's the prevailing conservative thought. And I understand that phrase about, the jurisdiction part of the 14th Amendment is kind of up for debate. When you look into it and you look beyond just the stuff people are quoting from the debates, it is understandable how people fall on different parts. I'm sorry. I've looked through it somewhat. I'm going to look through it more when I get more time. But my main point is just this extreme overreaction that I'm seeing from some conservatives and some that I'm really surprised. Nick Freitas, just kind of his reaction. I thought it was too much. Even the reaction I see from like Ben Shapiro to a degree. Now he's not been acting like Matt Walsh he's been throwing a tantrum on mine. Grown men throwing tantrums is not what the conservative movement needs. Biblical principles, act like men. Don't have a spirit of fear. have one, of power, where you're giving us, not giving a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. I'll get the thought out correctly there. This overreaction, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It does not help the conservative cause at all on this matter. It does not. If the birthright citizenship thing is something that needs dealt with, then they need to start working towards a constitutional amendment and continue with the things when it comes to the parents that are here illegally. That decision should not give the illegal parents the right to stay here. And so then, it's like, well, I mean, you would think they would take their child with them, but we're not going to get into all that right now. Just this reaction is not helpful. It's embarrassing. You have a bunch of conservatives, many of them conservative men, acting like that woman in that meme. And it's kind of pathetic. So it needs to stop. As a disciple, I look at this and say, this is not the side that would claim to be in line with biblical thought. That's a spirit of fear. That's not a spirit of power and love and of a sound mind. You have a good